Understanding and criticizing the doctrine of Islam and finding some way to inspire Muslims to reform it is one of the most important challenges the civilized world now faces. But the task isn't as simple as discrediting the false doctrines of Muslim extremists, because most of their views are not false by the light of Scripture. A hatred of infidels is arguably the central message of the Quran. The reality of martyrdom and the sanctity of armed jihad are about as controversial under Islam as the resurrection of Jesus is under Christianity. It is not an accident that millions of Muslims recite the Shahada or make pilgrimage to Mecca. Neither is it an accident that the horrific footage of infidels and apostates being decapitated has become a popular form of pornography throughout the Muslim world. Each of these practices, including this ghastly method of murder, find explicit support in Scripture. Now, I should say as an aside, I just happened to be looking at Twitter today, and someone included one of these images as a particularly hard-hitting and appropriately outraged response to some Islamist apologetics. But, this is an image that I would certainly rather not have seen and can't unsee. And it was of a woman, was described as a Yazidi woman, having her throat cut and bled out into a bowl that was filled with her blood. And she was naked, and this was just as horrible an image as you can imagine, and perhaps you can't imagine. Because the way you have to view an image like this is in the context of a wider understanding that the people who are doing this consider it an act of worship. This is the fulfillment of their norms, not a violation of them. And when these images get circulated among jihadists, they inspire rapturous approval. These are recruitment images, calculated to entice those who also view the world this way, who want to participate in an orgy of bloodletting and violence, and who view the prospect of their own deaths with absolute equanimity because they are certain of paradise. These are the people we're dealing with. These are the people who were on the streets of Paris last night. This is not an ordinary war. And if you can't get your head straight about that, you really can't participate in an intelligent discussion about what's going on here. These are not people motivated by ordinary political or economic or even tribal grievances. The real engine of this violence is religious ideology, sincere belief. That has to be understood. Okay, that was all a digression from my essay. This is back to the text. But there's now a large industry of obfuscation designed to protect Muslims from having to grapple with these truths. Our humanities and social science departments are filled with scholars and pseudo-scholars, deemed to be experts in terrorism, religion, Islamic jurisprudence, anthropology, political science, and other diverse fields, who claim that where Muslim intolerance and violence are concerned, nothing is ever what it seems. Above all, these experts claim that one can't take Islamists and jihadists at their word. Their incessant declarations about God, paradise, martyrdom, and the evils of apostasy are nothing more than a mask concealing their real motivations. What are their real motivations? Insert here the most abject hopes and projections of secular liberalism. How would you feel if Western imperialists and their mapmakers had divided your lands, stolen your oil, and humiliated your proud culture? Devout Muslims merely want what everyone wants: political and economic security, a piece of land to call home, good schools for their children, a little leisure to enjoy the company of friends. Unfortunately, most of my fellow liberals appear to believe this. In fact, to not accept this obscurantism as a deep insight into human nature and immediately avert one's eyes from the teachings of Islam is considered a form of bigotry. In any conversation on this topic, one must continually deploy a firewall of caveats and concessions to irrelevancy. Of course, U.S. foreign policy has problems. Yes, we really must get off oil. No, I didn't support the war in Iraq. Sure, I've read Chomsky. No doubt the Bible contains equally terrible passages. Yes, I heard about the abortion clinic bombing in 1984. No, I'm sorry, Hitler and Stalin were not motivated by atheism. The Tamil Tigers? Yeah, of course, I've heard of them. Now can we honestly talk about the link between belief and behavior? Yes, many Muslims happily ignore the apostasy and blasphemy of their neighbors, view women as the moral equals of men, and consider anti-Semitism contemptible. But there are also Muslims who drink alcohol and eat bacon. All of these persuasions run counter to the explicit teachings of Islam to one degree or another. And just like moderates in every other religion, most moderate Muslims become obscurantists when defending their faith from criticism. They rely on modern secular values, for instance, tolerance of diversity and respect for human rights, as a basis for reinterpreting and ignoring the most despicable parts of their holy books. But they nevertheless demand that we respect the idea of revelation, and this leaves us perpetually vulnerable to more literal readings of Scripture. The idea that any book was inspired by the Creator of the universe is poison, intellectually, ethically, and politically. And nowhere is this poison currently doing more harm than in Muslim communities, East and West. Despite all the obvious barbarism in the Old Testament and the dangerous eschatology of the New, it is relatively easy for Jews and Christians to divorce religion from politics and secular ethics. A single line in Matthew, "Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's," largely accounts for why the West isn't still hostage to theocracy. The Quran contains a few lines that could be equally potent. For instance, "There's no compulsion in religion," chapter 2, Surah 256. But these sparks of tolerance are easily snuffed out. Transforming Islam into a truly benign faith will require a miracle of reinterpretation, and a few intrepid reformers, such as Majid Nawaz, are doing their best to accomplish it. Many believe it unwise to discuss the link between Islam and the intolerance and violence we see in the Muslim world, fearing that it will increase the perception that the West is at war with the faith and cause millions of otherwise peaceful Muslims to rally to the jihadist cause. I admit that this concern isn't obviously crazy, but it merely attests to the seriousness of the underlying problem. Religion produces a perverse solidarity that we must find some way to undercut. It causes in-group loyalty and out-group hostility even when members of one's own group are behaving like psychopaths. But it remains taboo in most societies to criticize a person's religious beliefs. Even atheists tend to observe this taboo and enforce it on others, because they believe that religion is necessary for many people. After all, life is difficult, and faith is a balm. Most people imagine that Iron Age philosophy represents the only available vessel for their spiritual hopes and existential concerns. This is an enduring problem for the forces of reason, because the most transformative experiences people have, bliss, devotion, self-transcendence, are currently anchored to the worst parts of culture, and to ways of thinking that merely amplify superstition, self-deception, and conflict. Among all the harms caused by religion at this point in history, this is perhaps the most subtle. Even when it appears beneficial, inspiring people to gather in beautiful buildings to contemplate the mystery of existence and their ethical commitments to one another, religion conveys the message that there is no intellectually defensible and non-sectarian way to do this. But there is. We can build strong communities and enjoy deeply moral and spiritual lives without believing any divisive nonsense about the divine origin of specific books. And it is this misguided respect for revelation that explains why, in response to the starkest conceivable expression of religious fanaticism, President Obama has responded with euphemisms and missiles. This may be the best we can hope for, given the state of our discourse about religion. Perhaps one day, we will do, quote, everything we can to protect our people and the timeless values that we stand for. But today, we won't even honestly describe the motivations of our enemies. And in the act of lying to ourselves, we continue to pay lip service to the very delusions that empower them.